Thank you, delegates. We now have on the agenda the rules of election. We have General Counsel Madeline Soboleff-Livy and Valerie Hillman, Program Compliance Manager, to lead the discussion.
Mr. Chair, your team is ready. If we can all return to our seats.
Thank you.
Non-delegates are not allowed on the floor. If you are not a delegate,
Thank you, delegates. We'll now come to order. We will now enter into an informal discussion. Maddie and Val will lead us in a discussion on the rules of order and the changes that are incorporated in the clean version to explain what revisions there are proposed. After their presentation, I will entertain a motion to adopt the rules of order as revised, and we will then carry that motion forward in discussion. So Maddie and Val.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The documents should be available in Onboard. I'm going to, for purposes of just doing a walkthrough of the document, I'm going to walk through the clean version, the version that, oh, is this better? Thank you. For purposes of discussion today, I was going to start with a walkthrough of the clean version of the document. I think it's just an easier document to walk through. The documents available and Onboard do include the red line showing all of the changes in track changes. So the short background here is that after the last election, President Peterson asked myself and Program Compliance Manager Val Hillman, along with Stephanie Nyland, the Program Compliance Coordinator, to look at the rules of election and look at the last several years of elections and review the document for potential changes. So the proposed rules of election here would cover both the election of delegates and the election of community council members. A community council is defined as a group of delegates elected by a community and any additional community council members elected by that community. Excuse me here. One of the things that we noticed first in the rules of election is that there were changes that could be made to the definition section. There were several definitions that were in track changes. They're going to show that they were deleted. Some of them were not deleted, they were moved to a different section of the document because a term was defined, but you didn't necessarily know to go look back at the definition and find what the explanation was. So we really tried to make sure that the document has all of the information that's needed in the places where people are going to think to find them. There were also some terms that needed definitions, and there's some definitions for terms that were not used. So we did quite a bit of cleanup in the definition section, or excuse me, we propose quite a bit of cleanup in the definition section, and and try to transparently communicate that with the red line. This is a list of the new definitions that are proposed, and you'll also see that the definitions are in alphabetical order now. In the definition of community council, there is a proposed addition or clarification that says the number of delegates that a community council has is greater than the number of non-delegate members or the number of community council members. There is also a very lengthy definition of election, and we looked at this quite a bit. The definition of election is again proposed to cover both the election of delegates and the election of community council members, and Program Compliance was able to share information about many of the practices across communities. And for example, there are some communities where people run to serve as a community council member. They don't run to serve as a delegate. They continue to serve their community and fill important roles. And this definition of election includes that flexibility so that a person can be submitting a nomination, notice of intent to serve, to serve only as community council. Walking down, we also found that there were some places that were administratively challenging and wanted to have a consistent place where information could be communicated with Program Compliance. So there's a designated official elections email, and you'll see throughout the rules there are places where notices of intent can be submitted to the official elections email. The challenges to elections are also submitted to the official elections email. There is an official voting list, and wanted to just capture here that the proposed amendments include deleting Rule 10, voter registration, because the content of that is already covered. The tribe has universal registration. Tribal citizens who are over the age of 18 are eligible to vote. In the proposed amendments, the language here, moving down to Rule 2, and I'm sorry that the Zoom thing shows up on my screen, and there we go, that's better. So the proposed language here directs that the process to establish a new community council, the resolution would be submitted to the Office of the President by the resolution deadline. Previously, or currently actually, the process has a different timeline than the rules of election, and so this aligns all resolutions that are going to be submitted to Tribal Assembly with one process and one deadline and one method for consideration. The proposed amendments here would also increase the delegate allocation from having one delegate for every 200 citizens or fraction thereof to 250 citizens or fraction thereof. And so our understanding was that the proposed community, when there's a request to establish a new community council, needs to have the same number of voting age citizens as the apportionment allocation methodology. So the 250 here is an increase, or would be an increase from 200, and that aligns with the apportionment of delegates. In addition, you all may have noticed that there is a proviso in the apportionment of delegates that says, provided that no community council shall be allocated less than 2 delegates or more than 25 delegates. This limitation would establish effectively a floor, a minimum number of delegates that every community would have, and it would also establish a ceiling, a maximum number of delegates that any community would have. The rules propose a change to the local election official. The local election official has been a role that Tlingit-Haida has at times contracted with or had individuals in the community serve. Sometimes they have been easier roles to fill than others. With Tlingit-Haida's commitment to be having tribal employees in all recognized communities, that role can be filled by a local election official who is a Tlingit-Haida employee. In the event, the language is broad here, filled by a Tlingit-Haida employee. President Peterson has been clear that the intention is that navigators fill these roles. In the event that a navigator position, however, is not filled or a navigator is on extended leave, program compliance staff have been able to fill these roles, and so the language here is intentionally broad. There are changes proposed in the community registration section, and this section largely mirrors the current standards that citizens who reside in a community are affiliated with that community. Citizens who reside within 100 miles of a community are affiliated with that community, and citizens who reside more than 100 miles away from a community affiliate with a community of their choice. This new process, simply duplicates that standard for children, for people who are under the age of 18, and sets the same standard for how those tribal citizens are affiliated with a community. The proposed rules would also cover tribal citizen youth who do not have a parent who's a tribal citizen. There are tribal citizens who are raised by people who are not tribal or have other tribal affiliations, and the rules are drafted in a way that would cover those tribal citizen youth. Here in section 4 of the community registration, this is one of those places where I mentioned some definitional language had been moved around. So citizens who are temporarily away and have a reason for a temporary move, those definitions were up in the definition section, but it was not always clear that you needed, when you read this rule, that you needed to know these terms had special meanings and defined meanings. So we brought those down to the place where the information was provided, and it seems to get all the information in one spot and communicate the standard. Another change that occurs throughout the document is that you'll see that there are many fewer places where there's a specific date, December 15th, November 15th, individual specific days that on a given year could be a Saturday, could be a Monday, and instead the proposal has timelines that are proposed to become the first Friday in January of an election year. And this is going to mean that there's still a consistent, predictable standard for when election dates are established, but they're not going to fluctuate across the week. And when there are deadlines, for example, that are a Saturday, what does close of business mean on a Saturday or a Sunday? So this This gets, this requires just a little bit of a shift, but you'll still have predictable, or would still have predictable and consistent election timeframes. In Rule 8, the notice of enrollment and election, you'll see this in a few other places, but the proposed amendments would eliminate the process for voting by absentee ballot, and all voting would be conducted by electronic voting. This was proposed as part of cost saving. The cost to mail a ballot with the return envelope that has all of the explanatory papers in it had been a growing cost in the election process, and electronic voting decreases that cost. In the nomination and qualification of candidates, proposed Rule 9, there's a change that would limit the submission of declarations of intent to serve to only during the nomination period. The big change here is that previously there were times where people submitted notices of intent to serve prior to the open of the nomination window, and this would limit to the nomination window or the nomination period. In addition, the proposed amendments still allow for a community to hold a nomination meeting, but restrict a community's ability to limit nominations to that nomination meeting. And if a community is going to hold a nomination meeting, there's a proposed increase. Instead of 1 week's notice of a nomination meeting, proposal for 2 weeks' notice for a nomination meeting. And the current rules also allow for communities to have a ballot design process. In the equipment for electronic voting allows for a randomized process in the balloting that simplifies that ballot design process. In the voting rule, proposed Rule 10, and I'm saying proposed rule in part because I don't know if that's current Rule 10 right now. There is the language proposed for amendment would remove the ability to request a ballot by facsimile. Facsimile has been just decreasing in its usage across the tribe administratively. In the election challenge process, delegates or community council members still retain the ability to challenge the election results by their community, and there was a bit of cleanup in this language to really clarify what the process is. This is one of those places where you'll see that the process starts with submitting to the official election email, and by the challenge deadline, a written statement says changing the results, and that's what happens in a document. It would be challenging the results, clearly stating the grounds for the challenge, including reference to the specific rules allegedly violated, and by providing substantiating evidence, if any. The challenge deadline means close of business on the business day following the posting of the unofficial results. The intent by referencing business days is to capture the possibility that there could be a blizzard and there could be a snow day on the Monday following the posting of unofficial results, and wanting to be fairly operating across where people have the opportunity to be submitting, even if there is impacts from some of the significant weather and other things that occur in this region. In the challenge process, the president appoints a challenge committee, but the proposed language would add a requirement that the president consult with the elections committee chair in the appointment of that elections committee, in the appointment of that challenge committee, and reserves the ability of the president to not consult in the event that the chair has a conflict. Also clarified that a challenge committee is selected from within the elections committee. So the elections committee is the pool where challenge committee members are drawn from. In the event that the rules are adopted with a change that eliminates the option for voting by absentee ballot, and all voting occurs electronically, the proposed amendments would remove as a potential election remedy a recount, because with electronic voting, that's not kind of just the way the technology works. There's also a proposed new rule for candidates for executive office, and the language here is the language that's pulled from the Constitution, but as it relates to the elections process and the nominations process, it seemed an important piece of information to pull in and inform delegates about in one place. This is another place where requests are submitted to the official elections email when candidates for president or vice president request delegate contact information. In the event that a community council has a vacancy in the presidency, the proposed rules would provide for automatic succession of the vice president to the presidency. And the language as captured here is very similar to what the current process is for filling a community council vacancy, delegate, but put some time frames to it so that there is a process to ensure that a seat is filled. There are times where people are human and things happen, but this ensures that a vacancy would not persist for too long because there's time frames for the process now. So 30 days, 45 days, and then the existing backstop for filling a delegate seat at least 7 days prior to tribal assembly. The proposed rules 21 and 22 address the process for removal as a community council member or an officer of community council, and also removal as a delegate. The process for removal as a delegate is the constitutional language. It comes from Article 4, Section 2, and what was done here was just broken out the different sections and language from the Constitution moving over Moving over to this proposed Rule 21. The process for removal as a community council member or an officer of a community council is largely the same, just cut and paste language for that of a delegate, except that the voting body is not the executive council or the tribal assembly, it is the community council itself. And instead of absence from 3 consecutive days of any tribal assembly, the standard is proposed absence from 3 regular community council meetings without prior notice of good reason. Finally, there is a proposed addition to what is now, or what would become, Rule 24 for the amendment of rules that would set a higher standard for any changes to the removal process as captured in Rule 21 or 22, and going forward require that those sections always be amended by a 2/3 supermajority standard and not a majority standard. And that concludes my presentation, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Maddie. The Assembly is informally considering the proposed revisions to the Rules of Order. The Assembly may continue to ask questions in this informal consideration, which will continue until the Assembly determines that they are ready for the main motion, which any delegate may do by proposing as the main motion the adoption of the Rules of Order as proposed for revision. Are there any questions in informal consideration of the proposed revisions to the rules of election?
Mr. Chair, can I remind delegates to go to the microphone if they want to?
Mr. Martin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Some of these changes, are they constitutional changes? Like the number of delegates and who can run and some of those things?
Through the chair,
Yes.
there are no changes proposed in the proposed amendments that require constitutional changes. My references to the Constitution are places where the constitutional language or standards was brought into the rules of election. So there's no proposed constitutional amendments here.
Like limiting, excuse me, the number of delegates, is that a constitution statement?
Maddie.
Through the chair, the number of delegates authorized for community is provided for in the Constitution by referencing the rules of election. So the rules of election is the governing document for, and it's the apportionment of delegates.
Okay, so you're sure none of this is reflecting changes that are by the Constitution, is that correct?
Through the chair, I am generally confident of that. Article 5 is the delegate elections in the Constitution, and it provides that subject to the rules of election and the approval of Clinton and Haida. Each community, let's see. There's no language in Article 5 for delegate elections that provides for the specific number of delegates. It's a reference to the rules of election. So the constitutional language says that the rules of election is the place where that allocation formula is provided. That's what's authorized in the Constitution.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Hutchell?
Good afternoon, Walter Hotchill, Anchorage delegate.
Can I interrupt? Point of order. There needs to be a motion for the discussion.
We're still in informal consideration. Anyone may propose the main motion if they wish to end informal consideration of the proposed revisions. In which case we go to a more formal process of motion and amendment. Mr. Hutchell?
So moved.
We have a motion to adopt the revisions proposed for the rules of election. Do we have a second? I'm sorry, I heard a second. I didn't hear who it was.
It was Cherokee, Seattle, second.
Cherokee. We have a motion and a second. We are now considering the question, which is the adoption of the revisions proposed for the rules of election. In discussion, Mr. Hutchell.
Yeah, two things. One, just a clarification on, it's both under the, drawing a blank here, under contesting the election. So what role does the election committee play in certifying the unofficial results? And so it seems like it might be a circular route if they're certifying the unofficial results and then you go back to them for any contesting the election. You're going to the same body to contest it. So that's the first part. And the second part is that I would suggest for the timeline to submit a rebuttal or it has one business day after posting the unofficial results, and I would suggest we increase that. As we know, as we talked here, broadband is an issue in a number of communities, and if it's only posted online, allowing citizens to have more time to gather that substantiating documents as talked about in there that could possibly support their claim, I think it'd be prudent to allow a little bit more time to that rather than one business day after posting.
Val or Maddie, do you have a reply?
Yes, through the chair, the process for election challenges, there is more than one election that is overseen by by Clinton and Haida and the Elections Committee. And Val, you can jump in if I misstate anything here. But the election results are certified by the Elections Committee and posted as the unofficial results, and they are unofficial because the challenge period has not expired.
Okay.
If there is a challenge, the person who is challenging the delegate election, they have the opportunity to provide information about the specific rule that they may believe was violated and any substantiating evidence, if any. I think in both of those cases, the assumption is that the Elections Committee would not know about the thing that was potentially a violation.
Okay.
And so the person is bringing it forward, and the Elections Committee has responsibility to oversee the elections in a fair, trustworthy, and consistent manner. And so I think they take the information, the challenge that's brought forward, and evaluate it, I think, consistently and fairly consider information that presumably they did not have. And so they consider the new information in front of them. So I don't see it as a circular process.
Thank you for the explanation, but then I would also suggest allowing a little bit more time, but more than that the next business day for making a rebuttal or challenge to the election. I think 5 business days would be reasonable, but welcome to any suggestion on that.
And through the chair, if I can, I think I think the proposed language is just what the current standard is. So that,
Yeah,
I think one of the reasons for that is because if we do, it takes a while to get the committee. So once we post the results of the election and then we have if there's a challenge, we get the committee together and they try to resolve it. But if there's a chance that there has to be a new election, we have to get prepared for that new election, and it's really close to the tribal assembly. So that's part of the time frame when it initially was talked about, not at this time, but when they did revise it before.
yeah, my concern is that if you won't know that you have a challenge until they're posted, and then that gives you essentially 24 hours to pull together any kind of rule or documentation that you need to make that content. So I think, like I said, 5 days is going to be reasonable, at least 3, something more than the 24 hours from when you find out that you might be filing a challenge would be reasonable to those that are seeking to get a position. So I don't know if I need to make a motion or, I would move then that we change that subsection to allow 3 business days after the results are posted to allow to make that, everything else staying the same, but going instead of the next business day, 3 business days.
Could you go to that rule, please, on display? So my understanding is this is not a revision
Rule
proposed.
10, subsection 1, challenge of election, or alpha, and then 1. Section, Rule 13, right down there. Deadline to close the third business day.
Rule 13, Section 1A1, the challenge deadline means it would become close of business on 5 business days following the posting of the unofficial
I
election
think
result.
based off of the feedback from the difficulty getting the election committee together, I think 3 business days would be reasonable to allow someone to pull together any documentation after they find out that, yes, they would indeed need to file a challenge. So 3 business days. I'd like to propose that amendment.
Do I have a second? Is there a second? Anchorage, I heard Anchorage. Is there any objection to the amendment?
Proposed amendment is to change Rule 13, Section 1, Alpha 1, to read that challenge deadline means the close of the on the 3rd business day following the posting of the unofficial results.
We have a motion and a second to revise Rule 13, Section 1A1 to change from the day, 1 business day after the unofficial results are posted to the 3rd business day following the posting of unofficial results. We have a motion and a second. Is there any objection to the amendment?
This is an amendment to the motion.
If there's no objection heard, the amendment would be adopted and become, the main motion would then be amended to include this change.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
Maddie, there was an objection in the room.
Oh, sorry. We have an objection, so we'll need to deal with the amendment. Is there any further discussion to the amendment? No further discussion. Do we,
Mr. Chair, the person is proceeding to the microphone.
oh, I'm sorry, I can't see.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The reason for my objection is that when we have a challenge, it's all time sensitive. So once you have finished your election and there's the unofficial results, and if I don't like what happened at election time for some reason, I get the results the same as everybody else. If we don't take care of that right away, that's going to put their elections out further. If it's something that staff has to do, it's good. Adding more time, in my opinion, does not save the person who is doing the challenging. They have to have something concrete. We take that something, we research it, we check the rules, and we check all of the time frame of that community's schedules to make sure that their challenge is valid. So I speak against the amendment of adding more time. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Peel. Is there any further discussion?
Question?
Previous question is called without objection. Is there any objection?
Objection. Donovan Hannon, San Francisco. I'm also against changing the time frame. Unofficial votes are already posted on a Friday, so you have Saturday, Sunday, and then until close of business on Monday to gather any information you may need for your challenge. So I think that the time frame's already good.
Okay, so you're speaking against the amendment.
Yeah.
So we have a previous question called. Is there any objection to the question? So the rules of order adopted on the first day in section 6 says that if there's objection to unanimous consent, then the electronic voting will be conducted. So this would be a simply voting on the amendment. The question is the amendment to the rule 13, section 1A1, changing from 1 day to 3 days. A motion, a yes vote will adopt the motion to change from 1 day to 3 days. A no vote will defeat the amendment and retain the 1 day standard. So we need to prepare the voting on this question for the amendment.
Mr. Chair, this is Maddie.
Yes.
Staff are setting up the simply voting.
Thank you.
Yes, I'd like to, if everybody had their voting card, it has your login and password, just making sure if anybody needs help, if they can raise their hand, and the floor crew are prepared to help with that. And if delegates don't have their computers, you can use your smartphone or tablet. So if you need help with your ballot, with a card, if you can raise your hand, or if you need assistance with a device, we can, if you can raise your hand as well. And the floor crew will come and help.
Does everybody have their laptop for voting? Does anybody need help voting? If you raise your hand, somebody will come to you.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
we're ready with our ballot.
Okay.
Nothing is open yet. The ballot is not open yet. We're just asking for permission to open the ballot.
Oh, please. Sorry. Open the ballot.
Okay, the ballot will be open, and if there's anybody that needs assistance, please raise your hand, and we won't close the ballot until everybody who wishes to vote has cast their ballot. So if you need assistance, please raise your hand, and we will find somebody to come and help.
Chair.
The ballot is open.
Mr. Chair, this
Yes.
is Kathy Paddock online.
Hey, Kathy.
I'm having trouble getting on. And I need some help online. I guess that involves a phone call to me.
Can you put your number in the chat to the host?
Oh, in the chat, okay.
To the host, not to everyone.
Oh, to the host. Okay, to the host.
If you can hit refresh on your home page, it'll refresh your screen and you should be able to see the ballot. It will say amendments to the rules. It's titled Amendments to the Rules of Election 2023.
Oh, to the host. I'm trying to use my other computer to vote. My I put my phone number on there.
Thank you.
The
Click
ballot
in
is
Meta
open.
Communications.
Have any questions, please, or need assistance, please raise your hand and we'll have somebody come to assist you.
Is the voting on board? Yes.
Simply voting.
Oh, simply vote. Is there anyone going to call me?
If you go to your Outlook, they have sent a link. You can always use that. Sometimes at the end of the day, it's always good to take those links and attach it to your desktop, or you can email it to your other address to keep those links available. So so Outlook should have the Simply voting where you can just click on it.
I am totally lost. Here we go. Hello? Hello?
Yes.
No. I'm totally lost.
I think someone's calling you soon.
Why leave it there? Take it with you. It's our space. What if you tripped on it? Think ahead. I know, but what if you did trip on it? Yeah. Then who feels bad? Maybe I'll step on it.
I will stay in here.
Instructions on how I can help Kathy Potter. If you can call her, she has a lot of information. But I'm still 2 months ago. If not, then you can call her or you can say,
Mr. Chair,
President.
while we're figuring out the voting, can I ask for the privilege of the floor to make an introduction?
Without objection, yes, Mr. President.
Mr. Chair, honored to introduce a friend and also her staffer who happens to be a friend and delegate. But Elise Galvin was just recently elected to the House of Representatives here from Anchorage. And so I'd just like to ask her to just say hello to everybody and introduce herself.
Thank you. Hello, everybody, and what a privilege and an honor to be here. Thank you very much. And I wanted you to know a bit earlier and was grateful to hear one of the presentations today. It was the film on lands, and I wanted you to know that I think that the whole state can learn a lot by listening to you and watching the way you interact. I think it's very powerful. I want to thank you for the way you honor each other so well. And also I wanted to encourage you to warmly feel welcome in the Capitol building where I work. And I work there with someone really special, Tasha Hotch. And we are doing things a little bit differently. We make sure that everyone, no matter where they're from in Alaska, is listened to. And we're working really hard to turn those stories into something that's real and hopefully helpful for all people. That's our job. So we're working on that, and we hope that you'll help us be stronger in that way by being a part of the conversation and sharing the knowledge that you all have that's so important for us to have. Thank you.
Thank you. I would also like next to introduce a representative here in Southeast Alaska from Sitka, Rebecca Himshoot.
Thank you, Chahi Yish. I'm trying very hard. It's wonderful to see all of you. I will not take a lot of your time. I just know that when our tribal people are lifted, we are all lifted, and you guys have a very important role to play in all of our communities. And I know the people of Southeast Alaska, Native and otherwise, benefit from the work that you do. So thank you for being here. And if I remember right, you're one of the 5 compacting. Yeah. I'm an educator. I'm very excited about the work ahead in tribal compacting with education. So I'll have my eye on that and happy to work alongside you and with you. Hi, Delbert. Anyway, thank you, President Peterson.
Gunichi Shawa, thank you. I know we have a very busy schedule. I just think it's very important to recognize when we're working so hard to build these relationships with our on the hip, when they actually show up. And I always think of Senator Kukash. He always said it matters who shows up. So Gunichi Shawa to you 2 ladies for showing up.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
I'd just like to ask one more time if there's anybody that has not voted that needs assistance.
Has anyone not voted?
Oh, I understand we're waiting for one on the phone.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, Andrea Caesar has her hand raised.
Yes, Ms. Caesar.
I haven't been able to find where I can get the Simply Voting. I went to Outlook because they said it was on Outlook, but I can't find it there.
It's Stephanie Niles. She sent it on 4/19/23 at 10:15 a.m. So it should have your voting information card. Within there is also the Simply Voting link. So if you find her email on that time and date, so it was yesterday morning.
Okay.
Yeah, and the link is right there. And then also you can go back later and attach it to your desktop.
Thank you, Ms. Smith.
Oh, you're welcome. Oh.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
if we can let Andrea know that we have somebody that will be calling you shortly to give you some assistance.
Thank you.
I got it. How come it won't go?
Buying a truck, so they shipped all the paperwork to Richards. I missed one signature page. So they got a FedEx all the way up. They were gonna ship here, 'cause I'm staying through the weekend. Interior's here Monday. Are you coming down?
Yeah, I'm here.
Isn't it here though? What's that the other place?
Yeah,
Where's that at?
Generation Casting. So they're by the hospital.
So just Google it on it.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, Mr. President.
have a, while we're still trying to figure this out, I just wanted to, it was pointed out to me, Representative Dan Ortez was also here with us today, and we want to recognize him for showing up as well.
Can I ask a non-controversial question? Point of information? Yeah, yeah. Mr. Chair,
Yes.
may I ask a non-controversial question?
I reserve the right to object.
You want it controversial, I can come up with one, but
No.
I just a question that was asked of me, and I just want to verify. The question was, what is the voting standard for this change of the rule? Thank you.
It'll be a majority vote. So when the vote is announced, they will announce the number of voters and the standard for majority.
Okay. Okay. Question.
majority of the votes cast or the majority of the votes present?
It's the majority of the quorum present.
Thank you.
Where do you live in down there? I live in Tacoma. You live in Tacoma? Yeah. I'm gonna be down there for a few days. I'll have to hit you up for coffee. Yeah, definitely. Let me know. My sister lives right by the
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
I'd like to ask one more time, is there anybody who has not voted that wishes to vote? I believe that we are ready to close the ballot if there's, it sounds like we have all the electronic, the ones online have cast.
So I think Stephanie was assisting one voter.
We've completed that.
Oh, you have? Okay. So has anyone not voted? Our records indicate everyone has voted. Is there any objection to closing the vote? Any objection? Any objection to closing the ballot? None heard. Ballot is closed. Now prepare the results.
Don't beat around the bush.
You have the results of the ballot, the amendment to the rules for Rule 13, Section 1A1 that sought to change the challenge to 3 days from 1 day. The votes are 102 votes cast of 116 electors. The no votes are 54. The yes votes are 48. The amendment fails by a 52.9% majority. The amendment fails. So we're back to the main motion. For the attention of the delegates, in the rules that were published and read in Rule 13, Section 1A, there's a typographical error where A states submitting to the official election email, comma, by the challenge deadline, comma, a written statement changing the results, comma, clearly stating the grounds for the challenge. The word changing the results is a typographical error that should be challenging the results. Is there any objection to correcting the typographical error by substituting challenging for changing in A. Is there any objection to making that correction by unanimous consent? Unheard, we will make that change. Thank you. We're back to the main motion. Is there any further discussion on the main motion for adoption of the revisions proposed to the rules of election?
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
Andrew Strobel, Seattle delegate.
Yes, Mr. Strobel.
Is it still appropriate to ask questions on the proposal of staff?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, so I am curious about if Central Council regarding the apportionment of delegates has, in the initial Q&A session, there was a lot of discussion about the costs associated with tribal assembly and the number of delegates representative of the body. I'm wondering if there was any sort of analysis done for the cost per delegate for tribal assembly, and maybe the difference of the 14 delegates under the proposed rules that would be lost. What is the value or the cost savings associated with that change?
Through the chair,
Maddie?
there is not a cost of tribal assembly per delegate number. There's not a value that was calculated that way that I can share.
Okay.
Sorry. The information does not exist. It's not that I cannot share it.
Okay. Could you speak to any sort of analysis that was done for as far as the apportionment of delegates that was conducted to come up with the suggestions in the proposed rules of election?
Through the chair.
Maddie?
There was a Excel spreadsheet that calculated different numbers of delegate formula allocations. So I do not have memorized all of the different calculations that were run, but that was the analysis, was based on the number of current citizens, which is in between the delegate allocation formulas right now. So there was a delegate allocation formula based on a citizenship number from 2022. The numbers that were shared with delegates showed what the current delegate allocation is, what the proposed delegate allocation is, and in between what the current delegate allocation would be if a new allocation were to occur today based on the number of tribal citizens that have enrolled since the last allocation.
Mr. Chair?
Mr. President?
If I could speak to the proposal, as it's my proposal, looking at all the different scenarios and numbers, we could see the rising costs associated with and projecting what the numbers will change. This proposal was one that affected the least amount of change, kept it the closest to status quo while kind of putting a brake on things so that the delegates could then start making proposals next time around that would probably be more meaningful. We were just trying to put the brakes on things to give us that, if that makes sense. As I said, this wasn't a punitive decision. This was really trying to be the most fair and holding the line.
Thank you for that, Mr. President. Yeah, no, I guess where I'm ultimately getting at is there was a conversation ultimately of limiting the size of the delegation, and without the financial analysis, or for the delegation to not know the financial analysis of that decision making, I'm trying to understand the ultimate reason for bringing it, not knowing that information, if there was other considerations made in limiting the size of the delegation. Other than financial, I guess.
Mr. President?
It was almost purely financial.
Okay. Mr. Chair, is it appropriate for me at this point in time to make an incidental motion?
Please, you've followed the proper form, you've gathered information, and now you're prepared to make a motion. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, I ask for unanimous consent to divide the question of the proposed amendments to the rules of election. First, to consider the question of the proposed rules of election amendments in their entirety, with exception to Rule 2, Recognized Communities, Section 2, Subpart B, and Rule 3, Apportionment Delegates, Section 1 amendments. Second, to consider the question of Rule 2, Recognized Communities, Section 2, Subpart B, and Rule 3, Apportionment of Delegates, Section 1 amendments into two separate questions.
Do I have a second? I have a motion and a second. Mr. Strobel, if you could restate your motion for the recording secretary.
Yes. I ask for unanimous consent to divide the question of the proposed amendments to the rules of election. First, to consider the question of the proposed rules of election amendments in their entirety, with exception to Rule 2, Recognized Communities, Section 2, Subpart B, and Rule 3, Apportionment of Delegates, Section 1 amendments. Second, to consider the question of Rule 2, Recognized Communities, Section 2, Subpart B, and Rule 3, Apportionment of Delegates, Section 1 amendments. These are all contained on page 7, I believe.
So, Mr. Strobel, if I may interpret your motion for action by the Assembly, the first question before the Assembly, if your request for unanimous consent is approved, would be a vote on the revised rules of election, excluding those sections in Rule 2 and Rule 3 that you cited.
Correct, sir.
We would then have a vote on a separate question on Rule 2 and a third motion for a vote on Rule 3. Is that correct?
I actually combined the other two rules.
You combine the other two. Okay, so two motions.
Yes.
Is there any objection to Mr. Strobel's motion and the second? Objection, so we need to vote on the main motion, which is to divide the question. So the motion before the Assembly is to consider in a main motion a vote on the revised rules of election with proposed the rules of election proposed amendments with a without the section in Rule 2 and Rule 3, which would be the subject of a second main motion after approval of the first. So the motion before the Assembly is whether to agree to your motion to divide the question.
Would like to call a 5-minute caucus, Mr. Chair.
Without objection, we have 5 minutes. Mr. Strobel, did you agree with my paraphrase?
Yes, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. So we'll prepare a ballot. We are taking a 5-minute caucus. Thank you, delegates. We'll come to order. We are ready for the question. Ms. Hillman will read the question on the ballot for your consideration. Ms. Hillman?
Okay, thank you. The question, and the ballot is ready to be active. We'll read the question and then open the ballot. The question, are you in favor of dividing the vote on a proposed amendment by first consideration of a motion to adopt the amended rules without acting on Rule 2.2b and Rule 3.1, and second, consider a motion regarding those sections?
Thank you. Ms. Moreno, do you have a question?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, for clarification purposes, and thank you for the recess, since some of the smaller communities and others wanted to make sure that we are representing our communities the best way possible. If you could please read exactly what the two items are that we would be voting on, because I did call for an objection and would like to look at it, everything. I believe it's Rule 2, recognize communities. B, could you please state that?
Val, can you read the question again?
Could you please state what the motion maker is asking us to consider pulling for discussion at this time? Because the motion maker is asking us to accept all of the other changes, amendments, and corrections, but pull these two items. Rule 2, recognize communities, and I could read it, Mr. Chairman, if that's all right. Item B, a proposed community must have at least 250 or 200 slash, and then the correction would be 250 Tlingit and Haida citizens who would be eligible voters were the proposed community a designated community. The second part that they are asking to pull for discussion is Section 3, Rule 3, apportionment of delegates, Section 1. Each community should elect one delegate to Tlingit and Haida for each 250/200 in replacement 250/persons, citizens or fraction thereof, registered on the official voting list of the community, provided that no community council should be allocated less than 2 delegates or more than 25 delegates. That is what the motion maker, for clarification purposes, is asking us to pull for further discussion, and I had objected to this. Thank you.
So we have a motion and a second. The objection moved us to the consideration of the question as the main motion. So the motion before the assembly is to not to vote on the revisions, but to divide the question into two motions for a vote by the assembly. Number one, if the motion is approved, the assembly would then first vote on the motion to approve the rules of election proposed amendments, except for Rule 2 and Rule 3 for the section specified. A second vote would then, the next action would be a vote by the assembly on only those sections of Rule 2 and Rule 3 that were separated from the rest of the rules of election. So you have an opportunity to vote both on the rules of election proposed amendments without Rule 2 or Rule 3. Will you be able to make amendments, if you wish, to any of the provisions? And then a second motion, you would vote on just those sections of Rule 2 and Rule 3 pulled from consideration on their own. Is that clear?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
does the delegation understand that clarification, or are there further questions? Thank
Hard
you,
for me to answer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. So Val, can you read the motion, the question again?
Thank you. So the question that will be on the ballot reads as follows. Are you in favor of dividing the vote on the proposed amendments by first consideration of a motion to adopt the amended rules without acting on Rule 2.2b and Rule 3.1, and second, consider a motion regarding those sections? And that's what the ballot will read, and as soon as we confirm this is the correct wording, we will activate the ballot.
Thank you. So to be clear, in this question, the Assembly with a yes vote will agree to consider the rules of election proposed amendments in two motions. First, the rules of election proposed amendments except for Rule 2.2b and Rule 3.1. And a second motion would be just on Rule 2.2b and Rule 3.1. So this question before the Assembly is procedural only, and just providing for the next two motions for your consideration. So a yes vote will approve that path for your further deliberation. A no vote will not. So Val, please open the ballot. Thank you. We have the results of the ballot. 103 votes were received of 116 electors voted on this ballot. The yes votes are 79. The no votes are 24. The motion is adopted by 76.7%. Thank you. So the Assembly has now determined the path forward. We now will have two motions before the Assembly. The first motion will be to consider adoption of the rules of election proposed amendments for every amendment proposed with the exception of Rule 2, Section 2B and Rule 2, Section 1. Those two sections in Rule 2, Section 2B and Rule 3, Section 1 are excluded from this vote. You will now vote either aye, a yes, to approve the motion that will approve all of the amendments to the rules of election with the exception of Rule 2 and Rule 3 as described. A no vote will not approve those revisions. Are there any questions? Val, when you're ready, will you read the question for the Assembly and then put it to ballot?
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
could you give us just a couple minutes?
Yes.
Thank you.
Well, I apologize to the Assembly. Although approved by the prior resolution, we should take a formal motion and second for this question. Do I have a motion and a second?
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
I make a motion that we adopt all of these, and I'm looking at my general counsel here, that we adopt all of the changes and updates to the rules of election, except for section 1B, 1, 2, section 2, sorry. I don't have the paper in front of me. Section 2, Rule 3, 1. And, do it again, and section 2, Rule 2, section 2. B. Got it. Next time I want cards. Thank you.
I have a motion and a second.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
this is Charmaine Ramos, Anchorage delegate. I second the motion.
Thank you, Charmaine. I have a motion and a second.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
I'd like to make that motion by unanimous consent.
Is there any objection? Is there any objection? Let me be clear. Is there any objection to the motion to adopt the rules of election proposed amendments for its entirety with the exception of Rule 2, Section 2B and Rule 3, Section 1? Is there any objection? None heard? The motion is adopted by general consent. We'll now move on to the second motion. The second and final motion is to adopt the rules of election proposed amendments, Rule 2, Section 2B, and Rule 3, Section 1. Do I have a motion?
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
I so move.
I have a motion and a second. Do I have a second?
Did you
Who's
hear
the
that?
second?
Joey Kita from
Joey
Seattle.
Kita. Thank you, Joey. And any discussion?
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
Veronica Dalton, Huna delegate.
Oh, I couldn't see you. Sorry, Veronica.
I'd like to make an amendment to the motion that it be kept at 200 instead of 250.
So you have an amendment to Rule 2, Section 2B to substitute 200 in place of 250. Is that your amendment?
Yes.
And do you have a motion for Rule 3, Section 1?
It would be the same to keep it at 200.
Okay. To make the same substitution for Rule 3, Section 1.
Correct.
Do I have a second? Thank you. I heard a second. I have a motion and a second to amend the motion for Rule 2, Section 2B and Rule 3, Section 1, to substitute 200 in place of the proposed 250. Discussion. Sorry, I can't see anyone. Is there any discussion?
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
I would like to make amendment to the amendment. Andrew Strobel, Seattle delegate.
Yes.
I would like to amend the apportionment of delegates section to strike, provided that no community council should be allocated less than 2 delegates or more than 25 delegates.
So your motion is to, in Rule 3, Section 1, to strike the inserted revision
Correct.
as the last clause of that Section 1, provided that, and ending in 25 delegates, that entire clause.
Correct.
So the motion for Rule 3, Section 1 is to strike the last clause after the last comma in Section 1. That would remove the less than 2 delegates or more than 25 delegates qualification. Is there a second? Sorry, was that a second? Thank you. I have a motion and a second. Discussion? Sorry, I can't see. Is anyone at the microphone?
Mr. Chair, I'm
Mr. Strobel.
Andrew Strobel, Seattle delegate.
Yes.
Yes, I want to speak to the motion. Specifically, I have some comments that I've written down. I respectfully rise in opposition to the proposed rules of election on this section. Specifically, the addition to the cap of communities not to exceed 25 delegates. I ask this body to consider the consequences of capping representation from a respective community. We must recognize the impact of limiting the number of voices a community may represent through the application of a cap that would have profound impact on one of our most sacred things our tribal citizens possess that creates the very foundation of our government. I'm speaking of the ability to be equally represented through the selection of a representative delegate. Next year will be the 100th anniversary of the Indian Citizen Act, which effectively naturalized Native people and their right to vote guaranteed under the 15th Amendment. We must not forget how our history as a people through the A&B and ANS that so effectively fought for our representation. It was sacred back then to gain the right to vote, and it was sacred now in how we guarantee representation to our tribal citizens through that vote. As currently written under the proposed rules, a tribal citizen's vote would be diminished if they reach the cap versus a non-capped community. Mr. Chair, I cannot willfully support the diminishment of that most sacred right. The proposal before us is based on current population figures that would make a tribal citizen's vote in my community roughly 299 tribal citizens per delegate compared to the proposed, now amended 200 for non-capped communities. That's equal to 84% or roughly 11/13 when you look at the delegate representation between a non-capped community and a capped community. Mr. Chair, this may sound strange, but I'm really not a fan of fractions. I'm not happy how they've been applied in a colonial context on our people, and they move to segregate us. I am not 11/13 a person when I vote. I repeat, I am not 11/13 a person. Unfortunately, as we continue to enroll our tribal citizens in our community, the disparity of tribal citizens per delegate will only grow. I believe this proposal is precedent-setting, as if it is applied here, it can be applied in any context without any variance of how small or large a cap is deemed appropriate in the future, and whenever it is desirous by the majority that sets to implement it. This is a precedent we should not set. A vote should be equal no matter where one of our tribal citizens live. As an assembly, I hope that we can agree on protecting this sacred right to vote to be equal to our people everywhere in every community. That said, I hope we would take a longer look at the options to keep tribal assembly cost-effective and a means to regulate the size of our delegation through traditional means that we've applied in the past. Our democratic values are valuable enough for us to wait and to not set precedents. With that, Mr. Chair, I yield.
Thank you, Mr. Strobel. Ms. Moreno.
Really tall. Ah, shucks. Ah, shucks. I rise in objection to the amendment to the amendment. Sitka Delegate Paulette Marino. I rise in objection to the amendment because I believe that this is something that in the long run will benefit us as a whole and as a community, as a tribal nation. We are growing substantially and we have to look at that growth and be responsible to that growth. As far as fairness and allocations, the number that increase for a long time and for many tribal assemblies, many of the small villages of town, of which we are all a part of which we all come from, respectfully. But the villages and the small communities, our number of votes and delegates have dwindled. In Sitka, it came from 11 to 9 to 7. I speak in opposition to this amendment because I believe that our service areas and our voices are all across the world, yes, all across the nation. But it is the villages that we are all from that have unique challenges, as do the cities and as do many other places. We're sensitive to that. But to give up any of our muscle in those villages, one person that is here represents their whole entire village, not just a part of a city or a town, but their whole entire village. And I speak in opposition to the amendment because I think that this is something that would just pause so that we could take a look at it again next year and we can look at the figures, because if we continue on the path that we're on, we may eventually get 150, 200 delegates, and can we sustain that? Without seeing figures, it seems as though it's something that we would need to look at. Second of all, there are compromises that the villages would be making in this also, and we have to go back home to our small villages and our towns, as does everybody has to go back home to their cities and their places that they dwell. And this for a long time has been something that has been difficult for us as delegates. We always seem to come to this little circle that we've got to have these uncomfortable discussions, but I oppose the amendment to the amendment. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Sanderson.
Good evening, everybody. Keenan Sanderson, Ketchikan delegate. Before I get into my thoughts about this motion and the amended motion, and then the amended motion, I just first want to say thank you to our staff for putting in a lot of work to have this even before us today. I can't even imagine the amount of hours that went into this, so thank you so much for that. I'm not the best speaker ever, but I'll do my best to try to keep my comments concise. So one of my big concerns that I have is first off about our villages. Depending on what you classify as a village, the way I classify, I don't remember the communities I did when I did these calculations. The villages combined in all of Southeast Alaska have 26 votes. 26. We have 2 communities alone that have 26 votes at this time, projected to even further the gap if no changes are made this year. I have no quarrels, and I have no hate, and I have no intention of restricting my brothers and sisters in the larger communities with this vote. I'm a little bit frustrated that a potential yes vote on this motion, not the amended motion, but just the amended motion, or even the original motion, would cast me as a person that does hate my indigenous brothers and sisters in larger communities. It's a hard thing to be able to take that, and that's not okay, in my opinion. Sorry, I have a bunch of notes in here. Just want to make sure I have everything I want to say. I appreciate Mr. President's effort into this as well. I understand that this is not necessarily the easiest thing to do, and I understand that, and I fully support all of the not suggestions, but the cost-saving benefits that this motion would have on tribal assembly. I don't know the exact numbers off the top of my head, but tribal assembly costs a lot of money to do, a lot of money that could be going into other aspects of our tribe, to supporting our people. Something needs to change. At what point do we say enough is enough? I mean, with the growth that we're seeing, as was said by the previous testifier, we could be seeing hundreds of delegates come to this, and that's just not sustainable. If it's not 25, what do we cap it at? 30, 35, 40, 100? I don't know. But it is, with the amount of growth that's in larger communities, we don't see that growth in the villages. In fact, in some communities, we're even seeing a reduction in the amount of people that they're getting. So at some point, there has to be some sort of balance. Unfortunately, we're not set up in a way where we have equal representation between communities and proportional representation among communities, like as an example, like the House and Senate for any state or federal government, or our federal government. It just doesn't work that way. We're very restricted in what we have right now. But as a person whose family comes from a village, it's hard to see that the village voice is being not necessarily reduced, but just, I don't know. There's a lot more I can say, but I think I will yield and let other people speak. Thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. Shiana Hutcherson, Seattle delegate. As a delegate, first-time delegate, former emerging leader and resident of Washington, I'm also a granddaughter of a Tlingit woman born in an Angoon fish camp and the daughter of a longtime delegate, and I feel very moved to speak on this issue. The mission statement of Tlingit and Haida reads, to preserve our sovereignty, enhance our economic and cultural resources, and promote self-sufficiency and self-governance for our citizens. Yesterday, we heard our president and staff stand on that very stage and use words and phrases like meeting our citizens where they're at, holistic healing, our people are our people no matter where they are. We've got to stand together in our sovereignty, and many hands make short work. We also heard stated the intent to utilize our delegations in Washington and California to leverage those state governments and wield more power in DC.
We heard our Chief Operations Officer and Chief Development Officer use words like economic sovereignty and unrestricted revenue, initiatives that Clinton and Haida staff are already undertaking, which will serve to support a larger and larger population and the coinciding proportionate representation in this body. Mr. Ware mentioned that against all odds, we've come out stronger on the other side of a global pandemic than we were before. We hear our leadership again and again speak about self-determination. We also hear again and again that we don't believe in borders. And I have to ask, does that sentiment only apply to the Canadian border and not our own state borders within the US? Why do we speak about these things and use these phrases if we don't mean them? I can't speak for why every Tlingit or Haida has made the difficult choice to leave home, or why it may be challenging for those who want to come back to do so, but I can speak for myself. I moved back home to Alaska in 2018. I got a job here at Tlingit and Haida, and I worked in the communications department and helped at this very assembly for 2 years. Unfortunately, my second year into the job, a man in this community began stalking me. I went to the Aware shelter, and they told me they didn't have room or staff available to help me. Come back tomorrow and try again. So I turned to our tribal court for help. But they weren't able to help me because my stalker was not an intimate partner or relative, and we don't have jurisdiction over stalkers that are strangers. I was sent to the state and got a short-term protection order that quickly expired, and I was left without any kind of protection moving forward. I had to quit my job at the tribe on the spot and flee the state in order to remain safe and save myself. The folks in the Seattle delegation welcomed me back to Washington and have taken care of me ever since. Having to leave Alaska sent me into a deep depression, and having this Tlingit and Haida community to hold me up on the other side of that state border may very well be one of the only reasons that I am even standing here with you today. Are we really going to tell the women who flee from violent stalkers and partners, who are also within our communities, that they not only lose their ties to their lands, foods, and cultural practices, but that they also lose their right to equitable representation within this body? We have elders who leave to be closer to their nuclear families and medical care that may not be available here in Southeast Alaska. Are we really going to tell them that they don't deserve an equitable seat? Are we going to tell folks of the generation who were purposely removed from our homelands by the BIA that they don't deserve equitable representation? Also, as a descendant of folks who were viewed as 3/5 of a human, a fraction of a human by a government, and subject to malicious gerrymandering, I can tell you just how dehumanizing that idea is. In Washington, we don't get all the benefits of having a land base and being home in Alaska, like the majority of folks in this room. You can go department by department in Tlingit and Haida and see what we do not have access to. But we are here regardless. We're here advocating on behalf of the thousands of other Tlingit and Haida folks just like us. We spoke about a housing crisis in our communities just this morning. If our people want to move home, where would we live? Looking at our own website, there are only 50 jobs available. We have over 30,000 tribal citizens. If we all move home, where would we work and feed our families? If this measure is truly about economic feasibility and sustainability, we know that there are a myriad of ways to address that issue without reducing delegate representation. In fact, we've already proven that point through the COVID-19 pandemic by having our entire convention online through Zoom. That measure alone cuts down the cost of hosting assembly to virtually zero. When we're here, we're called the Seattle chapter, but really, we're the Washington chapter. In the state of Washington, we're separated and spread out similarly to the villages in Southeast Alaska. Some of us have to drive over an hour to reach our meetings and events in Seattle, and we are just as excited to see each other when we get here because it doesn't happen often in the state of Washington. Our delegates work year-round to create cultural engagement opportunities and scholarships and classes and partnerships with state representatives and the 29 other tribes in the state of Washington, which we all tirelessly leverage to create coalitions and inroads in DC to benefit us all, regardless of location. As a cultural hub and governance hub, our representation and our number of representatives matter, not just for us, but for all of us. Where in our traditional tribal values does it say that we value dividing ourselves? I believe it says the opposite. We hold each other up. Wuch'in, we work together. Our theme this year is sovereignty in land we trust. So do we trust our land to provide for us or not? Do we believe in our ability to provide for a growing population or not? Our people have been here since time immemorial. We've been visionaries and defied the odds from the beginning. And if our founders sat back and asked, is this most economically feasible? None of us would be sitting here. I would hate to dishonor their vision by cutting ourselves off at the knees just as we're beginning to stand tall once again. Our villages are without a doubt the heartbeat of the tribe, but our outlying communities are the strong arms and legs that help us stride forward. This is an important issue, and I believe that we can find common ground, but we have to dig deeper and we have to have more robust discussions. Today is not the day to drop the gavel on this issue. And I'll close with words from Austin Hammond. So our voices will be heard on our grandfather's land. This is all of our grandfather's land. We all deserve a voice. Gunaschish.
Thank you. Ms. Hatch?
Tasha Hodge, Anchorage delegate. Feeling very moved by some of the words shared, but maybe a little bit different. I just want to share that living in Anchorage, it's really tough to be from a Southeast community. A lot of you know that I worked for the hospital there for 19 years. The natives from up north always gave me a hard time, telling me I'm not Native enough to be there. And I take so much pride to be in this room and learn from everyone here. And I think about the impact we have as we work together. And what would that impact look like if there were less of us in the room? If the representation was less? How would that impact the movements that we're trying to make and where we're trying to make a difference? I've been a delegate, I think this is my 10th year, my 9th year, but I stay very connected with the state leadership in Anchorage, and I've always talked to different communities about the things that you need and how we could help in Anchorage, because it's not easy to reach out to people that represent the state when you don't know who they are. And so I know that other delegates have done that when they've had positions where they could reach out to other elected officials and help us do the things that we want to do as a tribe. And I feel like we're really making some strides where people, not just other tribes, but other governing bodies look to us for guidance. Look what they're doing. Man, those Tlinkits and Haida sure know how to do it right. And I hate seeing us be divided or think that saving some dollars here or there is the discussion that we're having. When I think about representation, I think to 6 years ago, one of my cousins ran to be a delegate, and he said, "This is so unfair," because he lives in the valley, which if we were in a Southeast community would be far enough for you to have your own community. But similar to Washington, Anchorage kind of scoops up everywhere else. So I speak in favor of the amendments. I think that we should move forward together as strong as possible. And I want to just lift each of you up. I appreciate you. I appreciate you guys lifting me up when I need it. It means more to me than you will ever know. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Masterman?
Schachen Yuchat Duasak, Stephanie Masterman, Seattle delegate. I want to acknowledge that we are in this discussion because we are responding to the substantial growth of our communities, and that's what has brought us here today. With that in mind, how can we ensure that our people don't fall through the cracks and get left behind wherever they reside? Down south in the lower 48, but specifically in the Washington area, our people are known as the big people up north. That is because we have engaged in trade and politics outside of our territories and our current national borders long before colonization. The concept of leaving our communities to do important work to protect our people and in the betterment of our people is not new. Because of this, we need to ensure that our organizations have strong foundations and representation in every community. The number of delegates in one community compared to another should not be considered a threat or an upper hand to any community if our goal is centered around providing our people the opportunity to thrive. This is including education and job opportunity. This is including healthcare, legal support, cultural engagement, access to land, and experience on the land, preservation of our languages and our cultural practices. I strongly believe that at our rate of growth in tribal citizens and in economic sovereignty, in our expansion of services, and especially in our growth in retaining our land back, that which we have been celebrating all week, that we are going in the right direction, building the blocks that will pave the way to lead our people home. However, so many of our people feel disconnected, whether they're here and they have separated themselves from the community because they haven't had the safe environments that we heard our award recipient, Chloe Kavanaugh, say the other day, whether they're here or whether they are in other places. We have to build those safe environments and opportunities for them to bring our people home. When it comes to meeting us where we're at, our people and people everywhere, we all can recognize that we have collectively reached a moment of unprecedented and substantial need in the last 3 years. Native people, in that moment of need, Native people all over the country began to turn to their tribes and their tribal resources. They began seeking us out. Those of us who didn't know where to find us started that question, started contacting their family members, started trying to understand what it means to be a tribal citizen or what it means to be a descendant and how to become connected and what does the whole concept of returning home came into their minds. They won't start, excuse me. I just want to say that we are representing our community in the capacity that we have, meeting us where we at, and we need to ensure that we can grow to meet that need. I do not support the cap on the delegate seats. I am speaking in support of the amendments because the point I want to drive home is that right now, in this moment, we need to respond with urgency to the people who are searching for help, resources, and belonging. If we don't allow ourselves the capacity to harness our people while we can, how are we to ensure that they won't leave us, that they won't want to come home, that they won't know that they have a home they can come to, that they won't want to or care to learn or participate? Those that are experiencing displacement, those who are understanding somewhere along the line they are a descendant and they don't even know how to find us. Those are the people we want to have the foundations and the support to reach and bring them in and lift them up and welcome them to their home. We need this representation now. We will continue to need it. And I just want to be very, very, very clear. With this representation, that does not mean that we overstep or push out our villages. We need them too. We need them more than ever, and as Ms. Yana stated just before me, our villages are the heart of our people and where we come from. Nobody in this room wants to silence the voice of our villages. For that, we wouldn't have a home to come to. And to provoke thought, I just want to recognize that there are plenty of other solutions that had we had the time to discuss over time and bring solutions with us, that we could have an alternative discussion and not let a financial responsibility be something that stops us. Just food for thought, and don't hold me to this, I'm just generating a thought stream here. Questions that you can consider if you haven't already. Can we ensure that there are designated seats on the Executive Council for village representation and a larger metropolitan representation so that we don't feel that we're pit against each other? We do the same thing when we ask for representation on our fisheries boards and other. Can we move assemblies to be virtual, perhaps every other year, so that we still have this special opportunity to share space and feel each other's energy and the good vibes that our good elder, Mrs. Schoonover, spoke of yesterday? Maybe we consider limiting the number of delegates who are able to come in person, and we plan far ahead of time on what is going to be on our floor so that we make sure that if cost is the reason keeping us out, that our voices will still be accounted for. There's been talks of, perhaps maybe we just create more community councils so that we can still have the representation we need while not hitting a cap. These are just several ideas, 4 at least. Let's not let this one financial reason be the reason that we reinforce this heavy feeling that we all feel of separation, and not continue to give energy to this feeling of us being in competition with each other when we are all one people. Ganeshtish Ha'a.
Thank you. Ms. Allen Dick?
Ganeshtish, I'm Patricia Allen Dick, Seattle delegate. I've been working in homelessness advocacy in Seattle for the last 2.5 years now. I was working in Chief Seattle Club, doing national coalition work with urban indigenous centers all over the country, creating new data of what our actual populations of urban indigenous homelessness communities look like. 70% of indigenous people in the United States live in urban communities. With that being said, I've witnessed a lot of our relatives coming in, especially during this pandemic, who had to make a decision not to go back home and continue spreading the coronavirus, and to stay in Seattle close by resources, close by healthcare. And that was a grief that we experienced for a very long time. And I'm coming out of that grief being here for the first time. I have made a decision to not come back to Tlingit, Ani, so that I didn't spread the virus, so that I kept my elders and my family safe. And a lot of people made that decision and couldn't go back. A lot of people still can't go back. A lot of people lost their jobs and are stuck in Seattle. A lot of them don't know what their resources are, and now that we do have more representation, they're slowly becoming in and coming in community. But also, there's still so many disparities. As we talk about money, we also need to humanize the other numbers going on. We have the largest rate of missing and murdered Indigenous women out of any city in the country, Seattle. How many of them are our relatives? Because I can tell you, from being the 3rd largest homeless population out of any city in the country, at least 1/3 of them are Alaska Native. How many of them feel heard in these discussions when we talk about money? How many of them feel humanized? I want you all to really think about that, because we also currently have an open case of a man who impersonated himself as Tlingit, who is not Tlingit, who claimed to descend from a village. He assaulted Tlingit Shahs. He assaulted Tlingit women. Where is the voice for those women in that current case right now that is open in Seattle? He got excused from kidnapping a woman that he clearly kidnapped because there wasn't enough voice from Tlingit Ani. With all of that being said, how are we moving? Are we moving out of abundance? Or are we moving out of scarcity right now? Because we really need to humanize our folks. At the end of the day, those things are still going to be there. And these are all symptoms of the lack of representation that we often have being displaced. I've been canoeing for the last 11 years at Tribal Canoe Journeys, and I've been canoeing at Celebration. I've humbled myself to a lot of Coast Salish nations, heard a lot of their stories of marrying into our people. Along the coast, I can tell you the families that we're married into, because I've not just canoed with one people in the Alaskan canoe families, I've canoed with other Coast Salish communities. I've canoed with Kwakwaka'wakw communities, Nuu-chah-nulth communities that do claim us, that do need that representation, because maybe they might not even be enrolled in our tribe, but they are present and they need that community. They need that healing as well. And as we have been serving as ambassadors for our nation in Seattle, we've also been humbling ourselves to continue to heal that displacement and heal the relationships we have. And people always ask me, when should I go down to Seattle? I say during canoe journeys, but I also say come for a lot of our other community-related issues. Not just for Tlingit and Haida things, but seeing how involved we are outside of just that, how involved we are in community and creating that abundance when oftentimes we've had to create resources out of nothing before in the past. And I'm grateful that we're continuing to build, we're continuing to have advocacy, but we really need to address this human crisis that we have going on in Seattle, because it is a crisis. So I really want to urge all of you to move out of abundance and not out of divisions, because this is our family. And I was born in Seattle. I was born in Seattle, and my father, being a boarding school survivor, he came down there out of needing to heal, out of needing to get away and be able to have other access to health care, mental health care. And that story needs to be honored. And a lot of our other stories of displacement need to be honored and seen as equally as important and equally as loved. And that being a love language in itself is just acknowledging all of our people as whole humans. Gunashish. And I support the amendments.
Thank you. Ms. Rowan?
Eva Rowan, Klawock delegate. I stand here as somebody who grew up in the village, born and raised, and I couldn't let Keenan and his words just be on their own. I want to say thank you for stepping up and talking the way you did, because I know that it was hard to say what you said. As I've been doing this for many years, sitting here, our village voice, it gets a little quiet. And it's real hard to make sure that we represent our villages the right way. And I don't want to give up that voice, and I don't want to step on our relatives either. And so I just wanted to say I support what Keenan said, because I didn't want him and his voice to be out there on its own. And that as somebody who lives in the village and has village problems, village issues, and we're facing all the same things in the village. We don't have cops right now in my village. We had a murder in my village. So I have to be here, and I have to make sure that I use my voice. And that means, as the three people that I sit with, I have to be a little louder, because the 25, I'm just one person. And I don't want to lose that voice for my people in my village. And like Keenan said, it was really hard to say those things because you don't want to step on other people. But I have to think about my village and my people and our village voice. So Ganesh Chish.
Thank you. Williams?
Good evening. My name is Joe Williams. I'm the sole delegate from Saxman. Saxman has one voice in this arena today, and it has been one voice ever since I could remember. We talk about standing, holding other people up. I'm now asking the larger communities to hold Saxman up. This is the first light of ray of hope that I can stand before you. If you vote this down, there's that light of hope that I can have one more voice in this arena here today. As I was telling another delegate here, when I leave this room to go to the bathroom, I have no idea what's going on here. I can't report that back to my community until I come back into this room. Larger communities, you have that. You have that. You can get up and go anytime you wish because you have other representatives, some as much as 25, 15. It's just me. Earlier days, we would say, Ishanachat, Ishanachat. And I'm saying to you today, to lift Saxman up, as you're talking about lifting us up. Lift Saxman up, because it's the first ray of hope that we can have one more representative here to speak on behalf of our community. Thank you for listening to me.
Thank you. Mr. Kadek?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You know, we started off like with 5 people there a few years back. And I used to wonder what my mom and all the old ladies in Cake were doing. They'd go up to Juneau after gold medal's over. And I didn't realize back then how important it is now, because it seemed like everything changed during the last couple of years there when we started getting Clinton Hydra involved more in how we need to run our elections. And that really bothered me there, because before we used to have people come in and vote in person, and that helped. But now we have to do electronic voting, and that really turned people off. Nobody wants to be told what to do. We already have that enough already. And to turn people off even more, and getting down to like 5 or 6 people to vote for us, you know, that's not right. We used to have more of a big turnout there when we had people in person there. And I look forward to the days where that this is a tough discussion today there, because it pits our family against family there. It's almost like the Civil War, only then it's a native against a native there. And we keep talking about how we want to work together, but we're still not working together, but we have to come to a common ground there, just like the young lady spoke before me there, that we didn't have our assembly there in the last few years there, so we should have had some money saved up there. But if that's what it's coming down to there, then maybe we should go every other year Zoom there, because, you know, I was happy there that, you know, I'm not gonna lie there, I'm happy that we saw what we saw in our per diem there. Me and my friend were really shocked there, because a couple years ago when we did the Zoom there, we were supposed to get $129, And then for some reason there, maybe came in early or whatever, but they ended up paying people $79 there. And that was just a big shock to everybody we come here to represent our people there, and we need a chance to talk. And everybody's here because they have a concern about what's going on in their community. It's not a high-paying job there to be right here doing this there. We're here because we care about our people there. And, listening to the good debates here today there, I heard good and pros and cons there, but what affects my community? So I have to go with what we have to tell our people when we go back home and look them in the eyes. Or, right now most of them are listening there that either you're doing a good job or you're doing a bad job. But if you're doing a bad job, then time to be replacing us there and get somebody that we tell our people to go off and get educated. And I was really proud of these young people that spoke up today there. And but it just pitting us against each other there. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Lepre?
Shakakata uyu hatu asauk, Kaintin yu hatu asauk. Jessica Lopre, English Canuck, Seattle delegate. I rise to stand with our people, because make no mistake about it, wherever we are at, we are Tlingit, we are Haida people. No matter where we're at, it's something that we take with us. It's something that's in our blood. I want all of us to remember that we have had colonization forced upon us. Adopting language and views of those of the same sort of mindset as the colonizers that have taken our culture and our histories and tread on them, oppressing our own people. Why would we want to continue to put that on all of our people? The cap at 25 delegate representation for the larger communities, it will hurt all of us. And the reason why I say this is we have incredible leaders that have stood on this stage and have asked all of us, reach out to your congresspeople, reach out to your senators. We need your help so that way we can be recognized to have our own land. Our landless communities need our support, all of our support, not just those of us who are in Washington. They need all of us to speak with them. Our veterans need us to advocate with them. They have been our warriors and stood at the front lines, have helped to keep all of us safe, to help to preserve our way of life. Now it's our chance, all of us, to stand with them, to stand with our landless, to stand with our veterans. Seattle, Washington chapter, one of our own senators in Washington, we have had call after call. We have reached out to that office. We have contacted that staff. We continue to do these things, not because it's going to help us in Washington or specifically in Seattle.
We do this because it is going to help our people back home, in our villages, in our communities that we all come from. So when I hear my mother's home community stand here and make me feel like I am less than because I live outside and I'm in Washington, not because of a choice, but because it was something that was forced. We have tribal citizens that are just being born in Washington. How am I supposed to look that child in the face if we pass this and tell that child, I'm sorry, but they capped us at 25, so you do not matter anymore? How am I supposed to tell that child, who is my mother's great big grandbaby, that she no longer matters because we've had a cap put on us? That is taking the same sort of narrow thought of scarcity that we have been living with because of a colonized view. I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman, but I cannot and would not stay quiet. I stand in support of the amendments. I lift my hands to all of our tribal citizens who are watching us online. To all of you, because it is your voice that all of us are here helping to represent. You matter, all of you, no matter where you're at. And we are here to help make sure that your voice is heard. Whether you're from the larger areas of Juneau or Seattle, Anchorage, doesn't matter if you're outside of a village, you matter. To our villagers, you are our heart, our love. We wouldn't be here if it weren't for the culture and the love that you have embedded within all of us. To all of my delegates who are from our villages, I love each and every one of you. Each and every one of you. With that, Mr. Chair, I yield.
Thank you. Mr. Cook?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Clinton Cook, Craig Delegate. I would just like to speak and say I support President Peterson and his proposed changes to the rules of elections. It takes a lot to put that out there to the delegates to change stuff. He has worked tirelessly to come up with an answer, and these are proposed changes. Sitting here listening to people worry about how many people delegates are, Rick's thinking about, President Peterson is thinking about the betterment of the tribe. That's what we're all here for, is to better our tribe. We're all members. We will never not be members. When you govern a tribe, there is worries that the tribe itself has to be taken care of. And that's, I believe, President Peterson's thought, is the betterment of our tribe. It's not village against city. It's for the betterment of our tribe as a whole. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Edwards?
Mr. Chair. Catherine Edwards, Seattle Delegate. I stand in favor of the amendment, but I do want to say that I too, like Vice President Cook, agrees that President Peterson put forth a proposal for us to consider something for the betterment of our tribe and to come up with solutions. I do want to applaud all the young people that got up here to speak their opinions for or against and to have a healthy debate. what I'm standing here to say, a couple of things. One is I really would like to end the regionalism and the village versus the urban. I would really like to end that part of our conversations, and how do we get stronger as a whole? And how do we come, like Ms. Stephanie did, with solutions or possible solutions? I think that is better for us. And I just want to let my family from the villages know that when I go places, I make sure that you guys are in my thoughts, and when I'm talking consultations, anything that we're going and we're having stuff that affects Alaska, or if it's affecting Washington, or if it affects Anchorage, I am talking on all of your behalfs, just like Vice President Sanderson does when he's talking about fish, when I'm talking about protecting women. I don't care where they live. I don't care that they're not just Seattle voices. We make sure that those voices. So Mr. Williams, you don't stand alone. I am here, and our other vice presidents are here. Your voice is being heard. And I think that some of us are not totally in disagreement with Kassan or Saxman getting another delegate. I think our main problem is capping the other, and the way we're looking at capping. I would suggest that we put together a committee of some sort to review this, to come up with some solutions that we can all sit here and decide and vote on, and that it would include dollar signs and matrices, because last year only cost us $96,000. This year it cost us $285,000. But we are talking about growing and making a lot more money. We are going to get more discretionary, unrestricted funds that we can use for this. We have to believe in our growth or not. Those are some of the things that I would consider, and that's some of the stuff that I would ask, that we put together some type of committee, task force made up of people in this body, and definitely including these awesome young people who've earned their rights to these seats, especially today. With that, Mr. Chairman, I yield.
Thank you. Mr. Stokes?
Shara 6, Yua Duathak. My Tlingit name is Koho, who lives in a mountain stream. I would like you to give you a food for thought. Very quickly, I would say we're beginning to look like electoral votes, like the states. One person could win the popular vote, but the states, the biggest states that hold the population, would win. We've seen this happen as we look back in the history of the President of the United States. We have qualms in Southeast here, and I'll include Anchorage too, that we have to stick together. I love Seattle and I love San Francisco. I've lived in both places also. But we have to remember that we live in Alaska. We have lived there. We were born here. We love it. We must stick together. It's unfair that we have 11 delegates in Anchorage, 24 in Seattle or somewhere, 25 in Juneau. I think we ought to do an overhaul in things. Maybe we need a new routine for voting. I don't know. Thank you for listening. That's my thoughts.
Thank you. Ms. Balil?
Hi, I heard, what Seattle's concerns are, and we can understand. It is hard to live in big cities, and there isn't as much help there, especially if you have no training or no family or support and all that. And I know I lived in Anchorage 33 years, and that's a big place. And I was very happy when Ethan, what is his name? Anyway, he used Ben Volke for the homeless people. And those social issues are always there, especially in the big cities for the homeless. And I think that Seattle is thinking of those problems too. And then I think that we shouldn't really have to just caucus to get people. It's like one vote, one person, you know, one vote for one person, and Saxman has only one vote for their village concerns. And to me, that doesn't seem right. I mean, one voice and one vote, you know. And so I speak in favor of the amendments, and I think the president is right. The more that it goes on and they get more votes, you know, and then the little villages who have as many concerns, and I grew up between Klawock and Wrangell, I know, and you know, it's too bad, but the city is responsible too in a lot of ways in big cities, but I would like us not to really be fighting about it. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Pook?
Thank you. Cass Pook from Sitka. Now this is too low for me. Okay. It's what I'm having a difficulty with right now is the division. And I'm sorry if I offend anybody, it's not my intention. But I see Seattle on one side of the room, and then the other side is all our Southeast communities. And we both have good arguments. I thought I knew how I was going to go, but the young people speaking, Seattle, your voices are strong. Thank you for sharing, because we don't see what you deal with. I used to live in Seattle for 12 years. And then I hear communities where there's just 1 or 2 or 3 delegates. We have opioids in our communities. We have murdered and missing Indigenous women. We have all of that on a smaller scale. And so I like the solutions that were mentioned earlier. I can't remember your name, but one of the younger delegates spoke on it. There's solutions. I feel like this ball got rolling and it's snowballing, and we have to make a decision like now. But there's solutions. We could still keep all the delegates. We can add delegates if we go virtual and don't spend the money. Sure, it's nice to see everybody in person. I like it. I like staying in a hotel. I like getting the per diem. But if we're going to save money, we can do it virtually and save money and do it every other year. That was another solution. But it's about reaching our people and being strong together. So anyway, I could say a lot more, but I'm not going to. And I'd just like to remind everybody too what parliamentarian Ed Thomas mentioned earlier, 3 minutes. We've been going a long time. It's almost 7 o'clock. And so I tried to keep it brief. I went over 3 minutes probably, but just be mindful that we're all tired. So thank you.
Ms. Peta, Jackie, would you indulge me, please? Juliana Smith has been waiting online for a question. Would you please let her go first? Juliana Smith?
I'm Juliana Smith from the Anchorage area. I'm originally from the Southeast. My mom's was born in Sitka. I was born in Juneau. Our corporations are down there. I came to Anchorage to work to make things easier. I'm just going to throw out some words out there. Colonization is revenue. We're not part of that. We are a culture, and every single one that have spoken today is representing their culture. It doesn't matter whether there's 1 person, 2 persons. We need to pile on delegates in those small communities, and in the larger communities, if we're getting larger there, we need to plant our seeds there, because the revenue is going to go all over wherever we are. We're going to pull in all that revenue, and we're going to make sure that we survive capitalism, but we cannot lose our culture. We cannot minimize our voices. We all have to be heard. And so I support making sure the smaller villages have more than one delegate, and making sure that the larger places keep their numbers or even more. And if you understand and you support your culture, you will stand by that, no matter how large the capitalism is influenced on us. We are indigenous first, and we have to remember that. Kunishtish.
Thank you. Ms. Peta.
Thank you, Jackie Peta. And it's awkward to talk like this, so I'm going to move this like this. How's that? I feel a little bit better. I sat and listened to all the impassioned speeches today, and I really want to say, first of all, I admire each and every one of you who got up, because this is not an easy issue, and this is not the first time we've had these discussions. So many times we've talked about the challenges of how do we deal with balancing the revenues of the tribe, our responsibilities, and our representation. And we've looked at many models. In fact, one of the things that the Juneau community said when we got together in our caucus was, this conversation's not over, not for us. This conversation is a conversation that needs to happen. And now we're having it in the open. We're not having it in small caucuses. We're having it in the open because we recognize that. I don't think there's anybody here who wants to say one versus another, because we do believe in culture and we do believe where we're at. And it is not about individuals. But as an elected tribal council vice president that you elected, we have a responsibility to look at the tribe in its entirety. And we have a responsibility to take on these very tough, sometimes difficult, mostly difficult conversations to see if there's other solutions. And you look at other countries, you look at other models, and I will tell you, it is not representation by population numbers. It's representation to ensure that those that are underrepresented have a voice at the table. I spent years with others like Will Micklin at the UN, ensuring that Indigenous voices that are the minority populations don't get forgotten, that they have a place to be able to be heard. We want to be able to make sure that our homelands are still heard and still have strong voices. This proposal, as challenging as it is, also strips away some votes from some of our small communities in Alaska, not just from Juneau, not just from the large communities. But it does. It takes away some votes from some representation from other places. I believe in consensus. I have aspired to consensus my whole life, struggling with nations across the United States to make sure that we come together in consensus. I don't believe in voting and voting for majority. I'll be the last person who supports things like that, because together we are stronger. And we need to be working together. So all I'm saying is, sometimes we do have to put a Band-Aid on the bleeding. I think this proposal that President Peterson and his team put forward deals a little bit with the fact that it is costly for us to have an assembly of this large of a nature with this many. And this is not also the first time that we've reduced the number of delegates. In my 10 years being here, multiple times have we lowered the number of representatives, because why? The cost of having the annual meeting was too large. We might have had a little spike in our revenue because of COVID, but I can guarantee you that Congress is looking at taking back every dollar that possibly can and not dishing out more. We can't plan on having the dollars that we had in the last 2 years. And so I would ask you to think not about how we as individuals are standing here today or how I feel personally, because I believe every one of you are enough. Who we are is who we are. We will never be less Tlingit, less Haida, less Tsimshian. We'll never be less than that. And we have a responsibility to represent all our people, whether they're 2 or whether they're hundreds. All I'm asking you to say is be the best leaders that we can. Tackle the tough issues and realize that there has to be some adjustments. We cannot continue forward with the amount of the way that the meeting is going forward. Juno is going to ask for, as soon as we get done with the procedures of this vote, we are going to ask that we come together, make a commitment by a motion that we continue to have this dialogue so that it can be brought forward at the next meeting and the next meeting until it gets done. We have to look at those models of representation that might better suit and fit our growing tribe. Thank you. Ganeshish Hawa.
Thank you. Ms. Moreno?
Thank you. I was going to yield to Seattle Delegate Daphne because this is my second time to speak to the issue. So this is very difficult, and these conversations are very difficult. But we are a strong people, and we are stronger together, and we can have these conversations. I wanted to share that I too had lived outside of Alaska for 15 years, in Colorado, in Los Angeles, in California, and in many other places. I know that it is difficult. I know that the voices that are representing those communities, their hearts are always and always will be with us. I wanted to share just a couple of really quick things with the proposal, the main proposal that would be coming before us. Some of the small villages, when they met, it was with deep consideration. Sitka, San Francisco, Ketchikan, Hoonah, and Anchorage would all lose 1 delegate seat. However, Saxman, Pelican, Klukwan, and Kasan would all gain 1 delegate seat. Juneau would lose 4. Seattle would lose 4. The ones that would remain the same would be Yakutat, Wrangell, Petersburg, Metlakatla, Klawock, Cake, Heidelberg, Haines, Craig, and Angoon. Those are some of the numbers that were considered. But I too have seen many different things during elections and during resolutions and during much discussion. And it is difficult when we caucus together to get people elected to stand for different things. And I just want to say every voice, every word, everything that was said today is powerful, and it will not land on the ground. We are one people. We have the solution to this if it's having an in-person assembly one year, a virtual the next, if it's having the same number of votes per delegate, we have brilliance in this room, President Peterson, and I think that you were just humbly asking to bring that brilliance forward to help you as our president and the organization to find solutions and work together. Representing Sitka, as I said, we would lose 1 delegate. If you look back at our Sitka table right now, which delegate would that be? How do you choose? Everyone's of equal value. But with Saxman, who would be sitting next to Kasan and Saxman next year? We would lose 4 from our larger communities. There's gotta be a better way to do this. So I humbly just present to you, President Peterson, this wasn't easy, I'm sure, to bring forward, but there is brilliance in this room. Whenever there's a problem, there's a solution. And I believe that your people will help you bring the solutions forward. And I say that humbly. Paulette Marino, Take Undiek, Alquan, Kagwan Tanyeti, Sitka delegate. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Alby?
I'm not that short. Thank you, Daphne Albee, Seattle delegate. And thank you to everybody who's shared so far. We are listening. Here are my thoughts. I am tired. I've been a delegate for over 17 years, and I am tired of the pitting against small community versus large community. It is not how our people should be. It is not how we think when we are out of this room. As for Seattle, we have no other tribe that we can go to, like Sitka, Craig, Saxman. There are many, but in Seattle, we just have our delegates, our people that we are there to represent. I don't think that any of you, all of us, pardon me, let me rephrase that. I don't think that any of us want to look at any of our people and say, your voice is less than ours. I don't want to do that. I don't want President Peterson to come down to Seattle, should this pass, and look at these people and say, some of your voices matter and some of yours do not. That is not how we should be. We need to find a better solution than this division that we have right now. There are better solutions. I don't think that we have to vote on this today until we find better solutions. This is not, we need more time to come up with better solutions to bring this forward to our people, to have it well thought out, not just here. Some of us didn't even read this until we were here at Tribal Assembly. We need more time for this. We need more time for this consideration. This is so important because it's important to every single one of our people, every single one. We have to hold our people up, not just part of them, all of them. I grew up traveling because my father was in the Coast Guard. I spent my elementary years here in Douglas. I spent my childhood in Saxman. I ended up across the country and landed in Seattle. All that time, my mother, Johanna Kabwag, as many of you know, was so proud of her people. We are proud of our people because we know that we are here to hold each other up no matter what. This time, our time is no matter what. That's what this is. It's not for part of you. It's not for just a few of us. It's for all of us. Every single voice matters. If we don't do that now, what is going to happen in the future? One of the things that, that we also have to remember is before Clinton Haida was even organized, Elizabeth Paradovich, RANB, RANS, they voted for equality for all our people, not part of our people, all of our people. We do not need to steer away from that. We need to continue on, and because it is important to me, and I sure as hope it is important to you. It is important to me, it is important to my children, it is important for me, for my grandchildren. I want it to be important for all of us. It is important to all of us. But this vote, should it happen, we need to think of all our people. I personally think that this vote should not happen today. It should take time for reconsideration. I would recommend having a committee set to create a committee to review all these options that many of our people have brought forward already. And this is just in this one afternoon. Imagine what we can have, what kind of great solution we can have if we actually all work together and make it fair and equal, where our people's voices are not diminished. I agree with And I apologize, I don't recall which delegate said this. Oh, it was in Anchorage, Juliana. We cannot minimize our tribal citizens' voices. Every single one of our voices are important. Every single one of us work on behalf of our tribal citizens. To me, Saxman is important to me. Their people are important to me. My families are from there. Wrangell, my families are from there. Cake. My grandmother's people are from there. It is important for every single one of our voices to be heard. Every single day. Not just today, not just tomorrow, 20 years from now, 100 years from now. As we continue to grow, let all our voices combined be stronger. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Price?
Yes, I'm Jim Price, Seattle delegate, originally from Sitka. I speak for the amendment. I've been a delegate for many years. And since I've been a delegate, well, I started out as a delegate from Sitka. But since I've been a delegate from Seattle, the urban community has never voted against any funding for the villages. We've always supported the villages. We tried to make sure there were at least 2 vice presidents, and we made that commitment many years ago that we would always have 2 vice presidents in the community of the villages. And I think that's very good that we have that. But our people down in Seattle, we haven't forgot about Alaska. I worked at the Seattle Indian Center, and I know many Alaska natives. And they always come in and talk about Alaska. They would love to come home, but they can't. They don't have the money to come home. They don't have anything to way to survive when they did get here. Or otherwise, they probably would all come home. And many of the alcoholics that are young people, they're veterans of the war, of the Vietnam War, and they had a hard time. God bless them. I had 2 nephews. I lost 2 nephews out of my family. Now, we've been pushing for education, and you saw tonight these young ladies and men from the Seattle delegation plead for you to vote for Seattle. You know, they want help. They want to work for you. Since this group of young people got elected in our community, they've been putting in grants. They've been working like crazy. It's just amazing what they've been able to do. They're getting grants. They're working away and trying to get money. And they're doing it. And that lady that spoke just before me, she's our president, and she's really doing a great job of guiding our organization. And thank you. God bless you all. And we will try to take care of your relatives down in Seattle or wherever they are. But remember, they're your family. And we want to help your family here. We want this corporation to survive. You're the management. This body is the management of the Tlingit and Haida tribes of Alaska. You people that are elected here, you elected the executive body to run the tribe in our absence. And they elect, and we elect a president also. But if they don't do a good job, we replace them. But remember, you're the boss. You're the boss. We don't have to beg. Okay? Remember that. And I think it's not a good idea to cut the management.
Thank you. Mr. Sanderson, if you would agree with that objection, Mr. President Peterson would seek the floor. Mr. President Peterson, I recognize you.
Chief, how I've sat here today and tonight hearing a lot of passion, a lot of brilliance. Those are the things I hope for. This proposal was not about repudiating Seattle. I was tasked to lead this tribe. Good times, hard times, every day. And making proposals is something some folks wouldn't do, especially in an elected position where it's easy just to not say or do anything. But I have to, and I was challenged by an elder delegate last year who said, you need to do these things. And when I looked at this, one of the things I want to say is I heard some of our young people speak, and I heard that brilliance I was hoping for on both sides of the aisle, proverbial or otherwise. And it lifted me, made me feel good. Although I heard some, I felt repudiate me, I was okay with that. That's your right. That's what you can do, right? However, I want you to know when I stand up and say I want to meet you where you're at, I mean that, and we're delivering on that. We're arguing over the loss of some delegates, and I understand how heartfelt people feel about that, how attached they feel to that, but I want to share some facts that went into this. According to Harvard, we are the 12th largest tribe out of 570 tribes in the country. Navajo Nation, 399,000. The size of their representation, 24.
Cherokee Nation, 391,000. The size of their representation, 17. Choctaw Nation of Oklahoma, 202,000. Their representation, 12. Muskogee Creek Nation, 90,000. Representation, 16. Chickasaw Nation, 72,000. Their representation, 13. The Oglala Sioux Tribe, 45,000. Now we're starting to get closer to us. Their representation, 21. Salt Tribe of Chippewa Indians, 45,000. Representation, 12. Citizen Potawatomi Nation, 36,000. Their representation, 13. Tohono O'odham Nation, 35,000. Their representation, 24. Rosewood Sioux Tribe, 35,000. Representation, 20. Turtle Mountain Band of Chippewa Indians, 32,000. 8. Central Council of Tlingit Haida Indian Tribes of Alaska, 118 for 33,000 citizens when this was recorded. So when I hear arguments based on emotion, based on heartfelt feelings, I support that. I'm one of those people. But I felt repudiated as if I have something against Seattle. When every day my administration is fighting to expand so that we provide services on dollars that we receive, 0. Please never say again that it's about your people aren't represented. Your people are us. You are. But you're repudiating what we're doing. And it's okay to have difference of opinions and to argue, but I heard tenor. I heard it, felt it, saw it. Not one of you, except for Andrew, came up to me and talked to me about it. I thank you for that, Andrew. When I ran for president 9 years ago, ran on 2 things. Together, we have the answers. And I said very clearly when I made this proposal, I wanted to hear discussion and different ideas. Thank you, I did, and I really valued those. I did. And I'm emotional, and I don't mean to be. Everything I heard tonight was truthful. It came from the heart. But what hurt me was as if I was trying to take away representation. I'm not. This tribal assembly is costing us over $600,000. Is that money better spent on having more people here or delivered in services to our people? So I love the ideas. I'm hurt by some of the repudiation I heard. Because I tell you, every day is about me trying to do more than we've ever done for our people wherever they are. I promise you that. And if I'm not, okay, that'll come out in election time, that's fine. But I can tell you this wasn't to divide us. It's not. And bring different answers. But I can tell you we're going to swing, the pendulum swinging in costs that is not sustainable, that isn't justifiable. And when we say we're not representative, remember, the proposal would put you at 25. We can deal with that, we can change, whatever. But I don't think I mentioned one of 11 tribes that are bigger than us by quite a bit that had more representation than you do. Think about that, because that's what went into the decision process. I didn't want to cut, I wanted to hold. That was the proposal. So, debate your side, fight for your issues, But to throw our own words against us, our own speeches against us, as if we were hypocritical or something, I'm sorry, it hurt. It hurt because we're not here to divide us. We're not here to repudiate you. I want to do more. And yes, I will stand in Seattle when we open that office and proudly say we're here to serve you and mean it, and we will do it. And I have the utmost respect and love, and I promise you, the minute I put this microphone down, I'm going to not hold a grudge. I'm not going to be upset. I spoke my piece as you did yours, but I just couldn't stand by and feel like I put a plan in to attack you when I didn't at all. I promise you. I really didn't. This plan is about making sure we move forward stronger, that our money goes to our citizens, because Jackie said a few things really important. This week, Congress voted to take back any unobligated CARES and ARPA money. They're trying to claw it back. We've used that to meet our citizens where they're at beyond geographic area for the first time. That put wind beneath my wings to serve all citizens, no matter where they lived, other than outside of the United States, sorry. So I think we can find those common answers. I think we can find solutions. I heard beautiful suggestions, ones I hadn't thought of. So again, together, we have that strength. And make your impassioned arguments, but let's not tear each other down to do them on either side of the argument, on either side. This isn't about us versus them, it's about we. And how do we better govern, and how do we better serve, and how do we make sure we do more? I have no problem being held to task on making sure we do more for our citizens. I promise you. And I hope I'm known as a man of my word. And sheesh, how
I still want to see my piece. I'm the only vice president.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Okay.
Mr. Sanderson, are you at the microphone?
Mr. Chair, through the chair,
Yes.
VP Micklin,
Yes.
I am going to normally speak to the speaker, so I'm going to face the delegation as I speak. So with that, thank you for recognizing me. Rob Sanderson, Ketchikan by way of Heidelberg. I'm sitting here with a clear head. I know that I've been put in this position knowing that I have to make extremely hard decisions, real hard. And you have to live with your vote at the end of the day and not, you can't worry about what everybody thinks of you or you'll never survive in leadership. I promise you that. I'm not talking out of emotion today. I'm talking about clarity, about things that were told to me over the years that this day would come, and we are here now. I support President Peterson in wanting the very best for what this tribe has. And I support our Executive Council's comments here today. I was the last Executive Council member to speak today because I wanted to listen. And I support our president from Ketchikan, not just because he's my son, because he does his homework too. And as well as our beautiful, well-spoken, educated women from Seattle. They did an amazing job. Very proud of them. I got a chance to work with them over the years as they were emerging leaders. And I will say this, our tribe's in good shape as far as bringing our leadership coming forward. This issue to me is not so much more about money, it is about representation. As President of Ketchikan said, where do you cap it at eventually in the future? While Craig and Cake are sitting at 2, will Seattle be up to 40? I'm just using numbers, and What the answer is going forward, I don't know. But I do know that, you know, we're going to be way underrepresented in the villages. And I have this is not an attack on Seattle in no way. I lived in Seattle for many years, many years. And, you know, I've lived in Heidelberg. I grew up there. I know what it is like, you know, and I've heard the story about the missing and murdered, you know. I'm the alternate. Yeah, I know I'm still catching up to where Catherine's at. You know, I'm her alternate, and I have a lot to learn in that, but I do know enough to speak on that issue. But at the same time, while we're talking about our very survival, it's the Seattle-based Washington trawlers and Washington state trawlers that are murdering off our fisheries up here. We need your help too, Seattle, on that issue. You know, you have the Seattle Kraken, you have Trident Seafood sponsoring them, and they are the biggest killers of our fisheries in the state of Alaska. You know, nobody from Seattle is talking about bycatch. It's the bycatch trawl fishery fleet that is devastating our waters in the Bering Sea and the Gulf of Alaska at rates that we've never heard of. And we would, you know, I wanted to save this little talk about coming down there and asking the Seattle delegation in the future about joining me when we do have meetings in Seattle, because we do have them there. They're well advertised. But, you know, I want to work together, you know. You know, we as leaders in executive council presidents, you know, I've served on KIC. That's probably the toughest tribe to serve ever. And I never let my emotions get in my way there. Maybe I have just a little bit, but you don't get to that point without, you know, standing firm in your convictions and what you want to do. So what the answer is, I don't know. But clearly there is division here. And I still feel that it comes down to the numbers. I've been approached by many people in our villages with their concerns about the numbers of delegates that are coming from the large communities, while we still have Saxman sitting at 1, Heidelberg at 2, and still possibly even losing delegates. And, you know, people throw that word out, you know, election time. I'm not worried about elections. I let my talking and representation for this tribe speak for itself. And if people ain't happy about it, then I can be removed. That's the last thing from my mind, you know. But when that happens, you make sure you guys have got somebody good to replace that, because it's really, really hard to find that representation going forward. And I'm going to leave this at this here. I've been with Tlingit and Haida for a long time. And we've had people say, we need to start moving over. We need to make room for our young people. All right? Well, I'm one of the very few long-time leaders that actually has taken that walk. I'm a founder of the SCITC, along with Richard Peterson, Clinton Cook, and a few others. I was either the chair or the vice chair of that Indigenous Transboundary Commission, which is a very successful commission. In one more year, I'm just going to step all the way out because we got good younger leadership. The Ketchikan Tlingit and Haida Community Council. I was the president there for almost 17 years. It was time. I had no idea that my son was going to be the president. I popped that on them. You know, it was time for me to step back, because we do need to start getting our younger leadership in positions, so when we step back, that they're ready. And, you know, from what I've heard, and I will echo President Peterson's comments, that we had a lot of brilliance up here speaking in our younger people. And so I carry one vote. However this goes, we still need to work together at the end of the day, because it's not about us sitting in this room, it's about our people out there. Now, I don't know how many people it takes to create policy for a tribe. I've heard President Peterson name off a bunch of different tribes. It's a massive amount of people in their tribes. It's really small leadership And I've known that from my days at NCI and still do. But I don't know what it's going to take. But we need to move forward and find a solution to this issue here, because if we don't, eventually, the numbers will, and as I stand here today, those numbers will get up to 40, 50, while our communities stay down in the lower ranges. And I don't know. You know, we have to come to something, though. So I'm going to just leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Cornell?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was going to see if we could move to table this until tomorrow. I think Delphine from Cielo had the right idea. Everybody's getting a little bit tired, a little bit emotional, and may say things they regret. I don't want to get emotional and cry because my mom says it's not good to cry in public. Just kidding. I make a motion to table till tomorrow so people come back fresh and feel good about each other. And kind of like the basketball court, let's leave it on the court. Thank you. I guess second.
I have a motion, Mr. Cornell, if you can clarify a motion to table this question to the ballot scheduled for tomorrow's session. I think it's at 8:30 a.m. and add that to the in front of the elections, Mr. Cornell?
Yes, that's correct. Thank you.
Do I have a second?
Kathy Paddock, I second that motion.
Is there any objection? No objection heard. The the question is tabled for tomorrow's voting.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
And that's today's agenda. Do I have a motion to adjourn today's session? I have a motion. Do I have a second? Motion and second. Without objection, our session is adjourned until tomorrow. Excuse me, our recess. Excuse me, we've recessed until tomorrow.